Welcome back, Cyclone Scientists. Today we're going to be talking about water distribution and water treatment. So let's go ahead and get started. So this is a graph that is really important. It contains a lot of information for us about how water is distributed on planet Earth. So let's take a look at this first column of the graph. And what I see looking at this first column is that the vast majority of Earth's water is saline or salt water that's in the oceans. 97% of planet Earth's water is salt water and therefore not really usable to plants and animals like us for drinking and other purposes. So what we care a lot about is this 3%, this tiny little 3% that is the fresh water. So let's take a look at this next graph, which will tell us about the fresh water. So if I take a look at this next column, what I see is of that tiny little 3%, most of it, 68.7%, is in ice caps and glaciers. That means that it's frozen and basically unavailable to us. So we've taken our 3% and reduced it to about one tiny little percent that's really available to us humans and the other plants and animals. So of that other water that is available to us, a lot of it is in the ground, is what we call groundwater. And then a very small percent of it is on the surface and is what we really see every day in things like lakes and streams. So we're going to talk a little bit about this surface water and this groundwater because this is really where our drinking supply of water comes from. So first let's talk about that very teeny tiny amount of surface water. One vocabulary word we can use to describe the distribution of surface water is a watershed or river basin. A watershed or river basin is an area of land where all the water in that land all ultimately ends up in the exact same place. And we can talk about little watersheds like the Bowlin Creek watershed, or we can talk about really big watersheds like the watershed of the Gulf of Mexico, which is kind of what we see here. All of this water that falls in this outlined area ultimately ends up in the Mississippi River and all comes down here to the same point in the Gulf of Mexico. So everybody living in this area is a part of the Mississippi watershed, and the things that they do to their water are going to affect the Mississippi River and its health. We in Chapel Hill are a part of the Cape Fear River Basin, so all of our water ultimately ends up in the Cape Fear River. And so when we're thinking about our water and how we're going to keep it clean, we know that the things we do will ultimately impact the health of that river. Okay, now let's shift gears a little bit and start talking about groundwater, the water that's underground, but actually, and we can't see it, but it really makes up a big percentage of the water that we use for drinking water. So one of the most important underground areas for water storage are what are called aquifers. These are areas that occur in between layers of permeable rock that the water is able to move through and get filtered and cleaned by, and then right above the bedrock, that impermeable layer of rock that's deep underneath the soil. And so right in there our water sits, and we can dig wells down into that water supply in order to harness the water. Water in an aquifer is usually clean because as the water percolates, as it goes down through those permeable layers, they tend to pull out pollutants and dirt. But what about surface water that we want to use? Water that comes from things like reservoirs, big lakes that store our water. This water has not been cleaned by moving down through layers of rock. So we're going to need to clean that water in a process called water treatment. So water treatment is when we take water from the environment and we clean it so that we can use it for drinking. So some of the most important steps of water treatment are first coagulation. This is when we add a chemical into the water that helps all the little tiny dirt clump together so that it's easier to pick it out. It'll settle to the bottom and then we can get rid of it. In class we saw this using some alum. We mixed the alum into the water and it formed big clumps of dirt that then sank to the bottom. Another important thing we do, which you guys also did in class, is filtration, where we pass that water through layers of different materials, sometimes sand or coal or rocks or gravel, kind of trying to simulate what happens to groundwater as it moves down into the ground. And and again, remove some of that dirt and pollutants. But one thing that we haven't taken care of yet is the bacteria, those microbes in the water that are so tiny, they're going to make it through coagulation and filtration. So also, we have to add to water some kind of disinfectant. We have to do disinfection, and there's usually two ways that that's done. One is adding chlorine, the same thing that they put in swimming pools, and the other is using UV rays to kill harmful bacteria in our water so that we can drink it. Now we also want to have a way to take our nasty, dirty water that's either going down our toilet or going down our shower or down our kitchen sink and be able to put it back out into the environment, because otherwise, as we saw in our demonstrations in class, we're going to start to run out of water. So what are some of the key parts of wastewater treatment, of treating our water so we can put it back outside? Well, one important step is screening, where the liquids are able to pass through the screen, but big chunky solids are going to be stopped by that screen and removed. Another important step is settling, where we allow any solids that remain and are really heavy to sort of settle to the bottom of a big tank, and then we can kind of skim or take the clean water off of the top. Again, we're going to filter our water. Just like in water treatment, we're going to pass it through different layers and try and get more dirt and pollutants out. But really, the big meat of wastewater treatment, most of the work is done for us by bacteria. What? We think of bacteria as being bad, but there are actually really good bacteria that we need to clean our water. And we keep these bacteria in aeration tanks that we pump full of oxygen to keep them alive and happy, and then we feed them our waste, and they help us break it down, and they help kill all the bad bacteria in the water. And without these bacteria around, our world would be a big, poopy mess. So we have to be very thankful to these good bacteria that help us treat our wastewater. And then again, we'll have to do a little bit of added disinfection with maybe chlorine or UV rays in order to re-release that water back out into the environment. Okay, so that's it for water distribution and water treatment. Have a great day. Here's to keeping our water sparkling clean.